Awesome. So thank you very much for joining us. We're going to do a fairly deep dive panel about blockchain analytics, even though this panel has like a little bit of a weird title. And we have some of the top companies working in these problems in the space, like Nansen, Xerox Labs, and Dune Analytics. So I will, before we start, I would love to start with a little bit of intros. So Danny, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Danny. I'm the data scientist with Xerox. I've been dealing with DEX data with Fredrik and actually also Alex. We use Nansen all the time. And so before this, I was also actually in a block explorer company called Alitio. So yeah, happy to talk about data today.
Cool, Alex.
Hey everyone. My name is Alex. I'm the CEO and one of 3 co-founders at Nansen. At Nansen, we help crypto investors discover opportunities, perform due diligence, and get notified when important things happen on the blockchain. My background is in data science, and I've been working in the crypto space since 2017.
Fredrik, you almost didn't make it, so happy that you're here. So why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't make it to the US as a fully vaccinated European. I'm bummed out about not being allowed to get in. But yeah, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Dune Analytics, and we allow anyone to easily analyze, share, and discover crypto analytics stats.
Yeah, so, and just about myself, I'm Jesus Rodriguez. I'm the CEO of IntoTheBlock, that we're a platform that uses machine learning and data science to provide crypto analytics, but we also have a second division that builds quant strategies for institutional investors. So we get to see analytics from the informational and actionable standpoint. So I was trying to figure out where to start, and this panel has a little bit of a weird title of Building Better Block Explorers, where really none of us work on block explorers, but so we can criticize block explorers freely, I guess, or not. So why don't we start with a question in that area? So when you look at the landscape of block explorers today, they all look very similar and with very similar capabilities of just tracing individual transactions and blocks and logs and things like that. So if you think about the future of block explorers, what are some key capabilities that you would like to see? And Fredrik, I'm going to start with you because you spend a lot of time in blockchain analytics.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I kind of agree with the sentiment of the question that block explorers are still relatively sort of crude and simplistic and kind of obvious in their functionality. I think that is still kind of the state of a lot of the tooling, that the openness of and accessibility and real-timeness of this data is like a huge opportunity for like product design and a problem space that I think is still very much under kind of utilized and explored. So I think one thing I think about sort of block explorers and the data in general is how it's still kind of hasn't gotten the dynamics of the crypto space with like crowdsourcing and like broader sort of gathering of knowledge and like making it a more dynamic experience. While so far like block explorers are obviously like very much directly derived from the what you see on chain and then like specific events occurring in the transactions and smart contracts. So yeah, I think that like we'll probably see more of the dynamics of the sort of actual things happening on chain go into the data layer as well.
Great. Danny, do you want to complement that answer or argue with him or something?
Yeah. So I totally agree with what Fred just said. I think one differentiator strategy can be like really trying to make a different version for different persona. Like different people are using the blocks explorer, right? Like developer, they may be more interested in looking at the trace and see what's the revert rate, or what's the actual function that reverted. But then like the DeFi user, they don't care about like low-level kind of transaction information, block information. They want to see maybe portfolio change over time. So maybe it would be an idea to differentiate persona, I guess.
That's super interesting. So speaking about the complexity or the differentiating blockchain analytics for different personas, so we all work in this space, and one of the things that frustrates me quite a bit is that blockchain analytics, they seem incredibly hard to comprehend for the normal retail investor. So Alex, when you think about what you guys are doing in Nansen, like how do we make blockchain analysis, blockchain indicators more interpretable, more explainable for the average guy?
Yeah, I think it goes back to what Danny was saying, that you have to think about the customer first. So you have to build products that are made for specific use case. So you could be building, explorers and analytics products for developers. You could also make it for investors. At Nansen, we focus very heavily on the investment persona. And so, for example, if you want to figure out what are the NFT collections that people are currently putting money into, that's something that we want to surface. If you're trying to figure out, is it a risky thing to do to put capital into a specific smart contract, it might be a good idea to figure out who's actually putting funds into the smart contract. And so we try to focus a lot on the use cases and the personas that we're building for. And I think generally that's a healthy strategy for any product.
So Fredrik, what do you think? Is just a level of abstraction for the specific use case, or there is something else that we can do to simplify blockchain indicators?
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense, frankly. And I think kind of obviously sort of the first data product in crypto was the Explorer, and the most basic need is like, did X happen, yes or no? And I think over time, as more people build, more people invest, more people engage with these systems in various ways as various personas, it does make sense to have more sort of different types of tooling for different types of users and use cases. And I think, as I alluded to initially, I think that whole sort of design space is still very, very early. And there's like a lot to be done still in so many ways.
Yeah, let me stay with you for the following question. So it's almost like to set the context of the panel. So when blockchain analytics is one of those things that I often find that it gets trivialized because we have a lot of APIs and things like that give you access to some data set, and most people don't factor in the scale of doing this type of work. So give us an idea from the Dune perspective. What does it take to index data from different blockchains for different protocols? What's the size of the data sets? What's the computation cost and things like that?
Yeah, I think one interesting thing that we've learned over the past, over this year is like these new systems, the layer 2s, the new layer 1s and whatnot. And you run into some like pretty low-level problems. So for instance, a lot of these are like get forks with like just more throughput and lower block time. And the get nodes are not actually made to handle that type of throughput. And then even though you have like a whole industry of like node access providers, none of them can actually get the underlying machine, which is like the get node, to give you the data fast enough, and maybe like it's even slower than how the pace the actual blockchain produces data in. So I think there's like a lot of complexity indeed in getting this data, and this is becoming like exponentially harder as there's like exponentially more data, and it is indeed like something that you can kind of articulate the problem very specifically, like, yeah, just give me this data to query. But doing it in practice is like a whole different thing. And indeed, like the problems run deep down into the design of the nodes and what they can do. And those problems, of course, like folks like at least me and Alex, and maybe to some extent Danny, try to sort of abstract that away from the rest of the world. But those are very real problems that we spend significant resources on. Yeah.
Alex, do you want to give a perspective from Nansen of the size of the infrastructure?
Yeah, so we have about 20, I think we have 20 terabytes of data when it comes to both the raw blockchain data that we ingest and also derivatives of that, as well as the labels and so on that we spend a lot of time on at Nansen. And I think we scan something like 0.5 petabyte of data every day. That comes from queries from our users, also jobs that we run regularly to make aggregations and so forth. So yeah, I mean, this is really big data, like when you talk about the scale of these different things. And as Fredrik mentioned, as you get blockchains with higher throughput, that also generates a lot more data. So even if you're working on something that is an EVM-based chain, maybe the technical infrastructure to integrate data from that is similar, but you're going to have to ramp up your compute resources very dramatically to deal with the size of the data.
Great. So let's switch to a problem that we all care about deeply, that is, and it's probably the biggest hurdle for blockchain analytics, that is de-anonymization, right? The fact that most data in blockchain is semi-anonymous, and with that it comes with a lot of obscurity from the analytics standpoint. So Danny, I'm gonna switch to you. How difficult it is, or let me rephrase it, how important it is to de-anonymize, to label blockchain data in order to meaningfully extract intelligence, and what are the biggest challenges that you typically run in trying to do so?
Yeah, I think from regulation standpoint, it might be useful to de-anonymize for potential suspicious behavior like anti-money laundering kind of topic. And potentially, if we are able to de-anonymize while still protecting the anonymity, we can potentially provide like under collateral lending products at that point, like when we actually can identify this profile of this account and we can build the credit score of this account. So that's definitely interesting and also going to be really useful. But I think the challenge is that I think in terms of like de-anonymize, there are a lot of like complex strategies already, like to actually mixing it. Like basically, you don't know how many wallets one person can hold, and potentially they can transacting with each other. And then so in general, it's like we will need to know what are the patterns people are mixing them first, and then reverse engineer to de-anonymize them. And also, we really need like a list of like a really good data set of like metadata labeled, and then we can potentially train the machine learning model to actually experiment. I would say.
Actually, let's build on that. So machine learning is obviously a topic that is very close to my heart and what we do. And when it comes to de-anonymized blockchain data, is probably the area that we seem to be more effective for different reasons. So how much, Alex, I'm going to start with you in this question. How relevant is machine learning in order to extrapolate identity or semantic information for blockchain addresses and compare that to traditional human label methods?
Yeah, so I think most people who have worked with machine learning know that you kind of have to build a very solid foundation on the data and infrastructure side. So at Nansen, we've spent, I would say, the first 2 years of our existence trying to build a good infrastructure. And there's actually a lot of low-hanging fruits when it comes to labeling addresses. And so we've done a lot of proofs of concepts around, for example, tagging up exchange deposit addresses. So if you look at Binance, for example, you could look up the sort of main known Binance addresses that you find on, say, Etherscan, and you might find 16 of them. But if you wanted to tag up also the deposit addresses they use, you'd run into, say, 4 million, 5 million different addresses. And in order to tag those up, of course, you can't do that manually. So you need to have automated approaches. I think that there's a lot of interesting things you can do even before you move into the machine learning side on the automation and heuristics-based approaches. But certainly, there are behavioral categories that you can build out with machine learning. There's inferences you can make, but then you have to, of course, pay very close attention to the precision of those methods, and you need to have some form of moderation involved as well. So I think the true superpower is if you combine man and machine in these different methods. And I think the category leader for crypto analytics is going to have to do both of those things really well.
You just thrown like 5 questions that I have in this category with that answer, but that's cool. So Fredrik, do you want to complement that so I can find the next question here in terms of machine learning for blockchain de-anonymization?
Yeah, I guess sort of a broader observation is just that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, the way this works, because of course, like there's a bunch of anonymous activity, but also the activity is there, right? So you do have sort of that insight into what people are actually doing or the addresses are actually doing, and that can probably sort of take you pretty far in terms of understanding what's going on and who these folks are, if not like with an ID number, but as a persona. So it's like cut both ways, the way it works.
Yeah, so here's a challenge that we actually run into when applying machine learning to these problems. Like as Danny was saying, you need like high quality labeled data sets to start with. In our experience for certain problems, the vast majority of data sets that you can find out there, I mean, Ethereum has like a disproportionately larger pool of labeled data set compared to other blockchains. And then that poses a problem of problems that you solve for Ethereum. How could you extrapolate it for other blockchains? Is that something that you run into? Like you can train a model that could identify, I don't know, exchanges or something else in the Ethereum blockchain, but then how do you do that for Cardano or something else?
That question for me?
She's confused, so go.
Yeah,
You're good.
Yeah, so different blockchains, definitely like, I think we're totally not there yet. Like we're even still building the data engineering for different chain and still EVM compatible. To your question, I think it also depends on the topic. Like for example, I think one approach Alex mentioned that can be really good starting point is like we look into the behavioral data and then we're trying to construct some metrics as a label first, and then we verify basically like a kind of like automatic way to actually develop this data set and then to apply to the topics. One topic I tried in the past is that when 2017 come up, there were so many ICO coming, and then a lot of them are like basically pyramid scam. And then what we did is like we trying to understand what are the typical pattern. Like basically they ask people to send some amount of ether, and then they're gonna send X 10 times back or 2 times back, but they're gonna stop at a point. And so with this knowledge in mind, and you can potentially build a few metrics, and then the challenging here is to actually label like maybe 200 or even 2,000 contracts that are actually scammy, and then learn and then train it. So I think that would be like an approach for us to develop like data science topics. But I think we're still too early before we talk about like multi-chain yet, I think.
Yeah. Alex, do you want to complement that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one benefit of EVM-based blockchains is that very often you reuse the same addresses across them. So if you've labeled up a lot of, millions of addresses on Ethereum, and you see those same addresses active on, say, Binance Smart Chain or Polygon, you can actually apply the same labels, at least with the entities. The other thing you can do is if you've made heuristics to tag up addresses at scale, some of those heuristics can also be used on these other chains. So if you've made heuristics to tag up Uniswap pools, and then there's a Uniswap fork on Polygon, you can apply the same heuristic and tag up these different addresses at scale. So I think there are some network effects when it comes to tagging across different chains as well.
Yeah, so we have had more like a personal experience. We have had some success with some machine learning techniques that as long as the features are not very blockchain specific, they can actually generalize knowledge to other blockchains. You can train on Ethereum and it will discover things in Cardano, which it was one of the things that I never thought it was going to work and kind of works. So it's kind of cool. So let's switch topics here a little bit. So most people think about blockchain analytics with the purpose of extracting alpha from the market. So let's start with a very dumb question. Danny, I'm going to start with you. Is there alpha in blockchain data sets, or that's purely informational?
Yeah, sure. I think so. I think 2 big ones I can come up with. Like one is like in the DeFi space, and another one is about NFT. I believe Nansen has a lot to say about that. And then so we start with the DeFi one. What I see is that we see all the Uniswap pool there are like liquidity distribution there you can see through their website or through Dune Analytics dashboards. And then you see obviously some, because the liquidity providers, they're not really that actively doing the, like how to say, liquidity moving. So they can not potentially efficiently catching up with the market. And basically, whenever you see the liquidity distribution is out of shape, basically that's basically a good price that you can arbitrage on. So that would be like an obvious alpha for anyone want to do that.
Fredrik, do you want to complement that? Is there alpha in blockchain datasets?
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing about this is that it's still like very much under appreciated is just how deep this stuff runs. In terms of also, one thing is like kind of trading who's holding what. Another thing is like the actual traction of these products. Like you can actually see the volumes of 0x or whoever on chain. And in like the traditional world, essentially there's only like product managers and CEOs and whatever that get to actually see the product metrics. And like, what's the value of like Mark Zuckerberg's dashboard for the traction of the Facebook product? Like that's hugely valuable. And in the traditional world, you have hedge funds doing like spending however much money on looking at random maps to figure out some variation in some markets, wherever it might be, right? While in crypto, anyone in the world can actually look into like the revenue subtraction of these products and kind of act accordingly, if that's as a user or as an investor, or whatever it might be. So I think in general, this whole landscape is just so radically different and so powerful compared to sort of, quarterly PDFs or whatever sort of fragment of data that gets relayed into the world in the traditional financial system, both in like trading financial use cases, but also actually in terms of product traction for these systems.
Cool. So let's take a pragmatic example. So if you're trading in centralized exchanges, many times you run into all sorts of bad behaviors like spoofing and wash trading and things like that. Danny, how can we use blockchain analytics to keep those things in check? What are some indicators that you can use that show whether there is fake volume on a specific exchange or things like that?
Yeah. Specifically, like if you are doing some WETH to ETH trading, then that's basically wrapping. It's not trading, in my opinion. Other things also, like if we're talking about like anti-money laundering kind of detecting, then I believe like we can use some graph analysis. Like basically we can do some connected components to see what are the transactions that are trading towards each other or like just transacting with each other. And then if you do have like a label for one of them being a suspicious address, then basically this is a cluster of address that can be identified as like the group you want to detect. Those would be some examples.
Yeah, Alex, do you want to complement that? Like some examples of how blockchain analytics can keep centralized exchanges in check?
Yeah, I think Bitwise made a really good report a few years ago, I think, where they studied they basically created distributions of trading activity, and you could show very clearly that you had artificial patterns in these distributions. And I think their conclusion was that there were basically 10 exchanges that had all authentic volume. There were many exchanges which were kind of in the gray area, and many of these exchanges were basically had 90% plus wash trading. So I think that's an excellent report that everyone should read when looking at wash trading on centralized exchanges in particular.
So let me stay with you for the next question. So let's talk about DeFi and blockchain analytics. Obviously, DeFi seems to be like the perfect use case for leveraging the blockchain analytics actively. And yet, we do these things of trying to abstract the entire space with like a single metric, like total value lock. And that's sort of the metric that you use to judge activity on a protocol. Can TVL be misleading? And could you give us some examples of that? The answer is yes, by the way, but can you give us some examples?
Yes, that's right. It can be misleading. I mean, I think the canonical example is Uniswap V2 versus V3, or most most dexes that are constructed in a similar way as Uniswap. V3 was designed to be very capital efficient, And so, when you see other DEXs comparing their TVL with Uniswap V3, saying, look at our TVL, it's higher than V3, they're really judging it, on the wrong metric, because you want to be looking at volume as the main metric for something like Uniswap V3.
Yeah,
or
Fredrik,
slippage.
Let me go to you with a different angle on that same question. So part of the work that Dune does very well is providing the ability of generating insights about specific protocols. So how important it is, if you're a trader on DeFi, to understand the specifics of the protocol instead of trying to go with a generic metric like TVL?
I think at the end of the day, like if at least if you invest in stuff for sort of holding it over time, the product needs to work, right? And essentially that's what like a lot of these dashboard at the end of the day display. It's like, are people actually using this stuff? And like, how many are using it? Are they coming back? Are they what volumes do they facilitate? So yeah, absolutely. I think that like no sophisticated investor in this space actually just use TVL as understanding like the traction of a product. That's obviously very, very simplistic and very often not even the right metric. So yeah, I think again, these are like 100% sort of open and browsable stats, and they should definitely inform all the people that are more sophisticated, but also a lot of retail users as well.
Cool. So before we go to questions, let's do a set of rapid fire, semi-rapid fire questions for the three of them. So let's go in this order. Daniel, starting with you. What are some important milestones that the crypto industry should reach in the next few years to unlock the potential of blockchain analytics?
Right. I think we are progressing. Like one example is like we were talking about TVL all the time, but now we're talking about capital efficiency. So I would think in a high level, like we'd go deeper into the metrics and trying to understand how actually each project can accrue the value for different participants would be a really milestone. Yeah.
Okay, Alex?
I think it comes back to usability and making the data interpretable, as you alluded to earlier as well. Making sure that any persona in the crypto space has dashboards, has interfaces that they can get value out of. And so if you have tools for pro investors, pro traders, that's good. For developers, that's good. But you also need them for the newcomers in the space as well. So I think usability is the main thing.
Okay, Fredrik?
I think what they both said makes sense. I think
you guys need to disagree a little bit. Like, this is so boring.
Sorry about that. But I think obviously crypto comes and goes in these waves, and now I think still the tooling for like this broader set of chains and layers is still kind of crude. So I think for hopefully if we get to catch up a bit with the market, we as like product developers, the next wave will have better insights into all of these systems, as opposed to sort of first and foremost ETH, and then all the other stuff is still very half-assed, if you will.
So next question, the answer must not be TVL. I'm just going to clarify that. So could you name one of the most useless blockchain indicators that you ever come across? Danny?
Wow. TVL? No? Okay.
You just rug pulled us on that question. Yeah.
The MBT ratio is my favorite on that, but Alex, what do you think?
It's hard to compete with TVL, to be honest.
Okay. Fredrik, come on, something different.
I guess it might be more of a 2017 thing, but like social media followers, maybe. Yeah. I'll go with that.
That's
just
cool.
to say something else.
I still think MBT ratio is ridiculous.
Oh,
but
I have an argument one. What about floor price?
What about what?
Floor price?
Yeah. Yeah, that one is pretty good.
What do you think, Alex?
I think floor price is a good metric. And
Okay.
you think it's a bad one?
No.
This is the controversy.
Yeah,
coming
no,
up now.
I'm proud. So let's go. Let's develop on that.
Oh yeah, I think it's a bad one. Like floor price, it only means like the current bidding, but like, it doesn't really mean actually the settled, right? Like you are not sure actually if the NFT can be bought or.
That's
so.
true. I agree. You convinced me. You convinced me.
Cool. So with that, I would like to open it for questions. Questions? 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 Come on, guys. I pay like 3 of you to ask questions. Questions going once? Questions going? Oh, yes. Oh, sorry, I cannot see. I think.
In terms of like analyzing NFTs, I know that one metric can be how active a Discord is. So is there a way to track in terms of a Discord how many members are in there versus how many are active?
That's a question for you, probably, Alex.
I haven't tried. I don't know. I did something similar in 2017 with Telegram, the fastest growing Telegram groups. I don't know about Discord. You could probably do it, but I haven't tried.
I think we can probably go from the angle of like on-chain governance voting participants. That can be potentially similar to that metrics.
Cool. Yes, sir.
I saw a chart, I believe it was Nansen. It was a bunch of NFT purchases and a time chart of them. And it was saying, some of these are smart money buyers, some of these are dumb money buyers. How would you go about identifying an address as a smart money NFT investor versus a dumb money, and what kind of indicators?
Repeat the question if you could.
Metrics might you use to identify that kind of thing?
Yeah, so the question was, how do you distinguish smart money addresses from quote-unquote dumb money addresses? So smart money addresses, in Nansen at least, is either behaviorally decided. So if an address has generated a lot of returns from NFT flipping or NFT investing, token investing, yield farming, and so on, they can qualify as smart money. The other way you get classified as smart money is if you are basically an address belonging to a known entity that is generally considered to be smart money. So, for example, a VC fund or a hedge fund in the space. So that's the way we distinguish it. Yeah.
All right, guys. I think we're out of time, so please join me to thank your panel. This was awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.